started. Welcome to the City of Newburyport FY24 joint budget meeting with the City Council and the School Committee. Chief of Staff Andrew Levine, will you take the roll, please?
I'd be happy to, Mayor. So start with School Committee Member Callahan.
Here.
Councillor Cameron, not present. Committee Member Cole.
Here.
Councillor Donahue.
Present.
Committee Member Hall. Not present. Committee Member Higgins.
Here.
Councillor Khan.
Present.
Councillor Lane. Not present. Councillor McCauley.
Here.
Committee Member Menon.
Here.
Councillor Preston.
Here.
Councillor Vogel.
Present.
Committee Member Walker.
Present.
Councillor Wallace. Not present. Councillor Wright.
Here.
Councillor Zeed.
Here.
Council President Shand.
Here.
And Mayor Reardon.
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Levine. All right, well, welcome everyone tonight. Again, apologize for the budget cuts. I was not able to provide dinner for you tonight. We will look to see if we can add that next year, but it's great to get everybody together. So as you know, this is a meeting that is mandated by the Charter, Section 6-2. The Mayor shall call a joint meeting of the City Council and the School Committee to include the Superintendent of Schools before the commencement of the annual budget process. 2, review the financial condition of the city, revenue and expenditure forecasts, and other relevant information prepared by the Mayor in order to develop a coordinated budget. And just so we'll get through the whole presentation tonight, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So just remember, when you do speak, because we are broadcasting this on our with our friends at NCF Hub and Port Media, that you do need to talk into the mic. So we're just gonna have to do some mic sharing at the tables, okay? So we should be all right with that. All right, so let's jump into the city's financial condition. You know, we're still maintaining our AAA credit rating, which was reaffirmed in May 2022 by the S&P. So again, we're a very strong residential economy. Again, that hasn't changed. You're going to see the same pie graphs, I think, that you've seen the last few years about, you know, where our revenues are coming from. We have very strong management with Ethan manning the finance department. We've had really strong financial policies and practices in place. Stable budgetary performances with consistent reserves, which Ethan will talk a little bit about. And again, a manageable debt profile, which we'll also talk about. And we actually have already been talking about this, right, with some of the projects that we're looking at for next year and some of the things moving forward and looking at which ways we can manage this debt. We also have an elevated pension and the OPEB liabilities that are expected to continue to grow, and that's something that we continue to monitor. So these are the pie graphs I was talking about before. This is very similar into years past. As you know, why we do this together with our 2 elected bodies, because the schools do make up such a significant piece of our budget, at just about 60%. And then you can see how that education budget breaks down. And again, so I'll do, Ethan and I will go through the city part here, and then we'll have Sean and Phil Littlehale come up and talk about the school portion of this. And revenue sources, we just kind of spoke about. Again, we're such a property tax heavy community with 84% of our revenues coming from our taxes, and then it breaks down our local receipts net aid as well. We do have a lot of different federal aid to talk about. So on the school side, we'll talk about ESSER. I think FY24 is the last year for ESSER funds to be spent, but we'll let Sean and Phil go through that. And then we'll talk about ARPA, where we stand right now with the $5 million that we received, and also any kind of money with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Ethan here to get into the numbers a little bit more.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Ethan Manning. I'm the City Auditor and Finance Director. I think I've met most of you, except for maybe our new member here. Welcome. So this is a look at the city's reserve balances since FY14 to present. In terms of the general fund reserve, we look at the city's certified free cash balance, which is basically the unencumbered balance at the end of each fiscal year. Combine that with our stabilization trust fund, which typically at the state level, they'll refer to this as your rainy day fund. So you can see in the current fiscal year 23, we've actually gone slightly above our policy target range of 8 to 10% of annual spending, up to 10.5%. And we'll kind of explain why in the next slide here. So free cash certification, for FY23 was certified at 4.3 million for the general fund. You can see the ending balances for the enterprise funds on the screen. And this is really a trend that was experienced in pretty much all cities and towns across Massachusetts as we began to rebound from the pandemic. You also had some one-time revenue sources drop during the last fiscal year, such as the reimbursement from the state's COVID-19 sick fund, reimbursing cities and towns if they had folks out due to COVID. There were some prior year reimbursements, rebates related to COVID, all that dropped. So at the end of the day, we had this infusion of almost $1 million in additional revenue, above what we would have seen in a normal fiscal year. So you can see, based on the proposed spending thus far, it brings us down to what would be a projected balance of $2.7 million to get us through the end of the year in terms of appropriations. We're currently looking at funding for the culvert, which otherwise would have come out of debt or the American Rescue Plan Act funds, a large infusion directly into the Stabilization Trust Fund of $500,000, and then using approximately $400,000 to defray the tax rate, which the council will be discussing at their next meeting. This is where we stand in terms of the city's allocation from the American Rescue Plan. The city's total allocation was just under $5.5 million, of which $3.5 million has been appropriated to these projects, leaving just under $2 million for appropriation. And it's my understanding that the mayor will be looking to reconvene that ad hoc working group very soon to kind of see what we do with this funding moving forward. This is the city's outstanding debt as of the end of fiscal year 22. So you'll see the total debt outstanding, the citywide, so it includes water, sewer, the Community Preservation Act, and then of course the general fund. So at the end of the year, there was 94.1 million outstanding. This time last year, there was 98.8 million outstanding. So a reduction in principal of just under $5 million. And of that, approximately $10 million is budgeted within the existing property 2.5 tax levy that we look at in the general fund, which we'll get into a little bit more in the next couple slides here. So of course, the largest debt outstanding, your water, sewer, large plant projects and infrastructure, followed by the Bresnahan and the Knockmolin School renovations. So this is a slide that we've been reviewing recently with the City Council in particular, in terms of what the city's borrowing capacity looks like going forward. So these blue bars represent what the estimated annual debt service would be for each of these projects, which are basically on the city's radar, we think, for potentially being, a project where we might borrow within the next 3 to 5 years. So you can kind of see how they stack up from left to right. And then this green bar here is kind of what I've been calling our policy target, which basically equates to 2.5% of each year's net revenue as kind of a goal which the city could work to get to in terms of carving out that portion of your budget that can be allocated to routine capital spending. So this was a chart that I put together to kind of put this into historical context, going all the way back to FY 1998. You can see how the percentage of the budget that's being spent on debt has come down considerably over the past 20 plus years. You can see back in FY 98, in fact, we were at 3.7% of the annual budget being spent to service debt, where that dropped down all the way to 1.1% in FY '20 as more debt rolled off over the past 20 years compared to new debt that rolled on. And then kind of to the right side here, we kind of illustrate what would be the projected capacity for new debt service going forward if the city is able to work towards budgeting at least 2.5% of each year's budget to new debt service and existing debt service. And then, of course, any discussion about the city's financial condition would not be complete without mentioning our other major liabilities. Of course, the pension liability, which Massachusetts has been working on reforming for decades and has kind of taken the front burner compared to the other post-employment benefits, which kind of came on the radar in the past decade in terms of new governmental accounting standard board's pronouncements, which now requires to carry both of these numbers right on the city's balance sheet. So as of January 1st, 2022, the pension plan was 72.5% funded, whereas the OPEB liability was 1.3% funded. And now we'll turn into the 5-year revenue and expenditure forecasting. So these are mostly the budget pressures that we've been talking about the past few years in terms of the continued budget pressure from collective bargaining agreements, with personnel being by far the largest part of both the city and school budgets combined. And you add into that the impact from the city's pension plans and the health insurance benefits. That's really a huge budget pressure as you work to build the budget each year, and really, eating up a large portion of what we have available to work with in terms of flexibility each year. But in terms of new pressures we're seeing this year, of course, inflation is huge. That's impacting everything on the operating side and the capital side. A lot of projects, goods and services are at least 50% more than they were just a couple years ago, making it very hard to kind of provide the same service in the same project based on, budgets that were built on pricing from, a year or so ago. Of course, unfunded mandates are always a concern. Additional local revenue from question 1. Of course, that was the constitutional amendment for a surcharge on income over $1 million. It's unclear how that'll trickle down to cities and towns exactly. It is earmarked for education and transportation, as you all know, but it's unclear how that'll arrive to us in the form of, Chapter 70 payments or charter school reimbursements and, the whole suite of education funding that's out there. And then, of course, on the capital side, continued pressures, infrastructure is always a continuing battle, especially as, we work to bring climate change into the capital planning and, dealing with, the water, sewer, aging infrastructure. So in terms of our forecasting, we maintain a 5-year projection, which is based on annual revenue under Proposition 2.5. It's forecasting local receipts, state aid, and then any other available funds. For example, the parking fund that we might use to offset what's budgeted each year. And it builds off the current year budget to ensure that a level services budget can be maintained, and then also, offsetting any, pressures from changes in pricing. And it works to, naturally adhere to our financial policies by not using one-time revenue for operations, maintaining our reserve accounts, and continuing to make investments in the city's capital improvement plan. And these are really the major assumptions that, are behind the forecast. And I'd say these are very big assumptions in terms of, tying labor to the employment cost index, service and supplies to the consumer price index, Health insurance costs, we're assuming those go up 4% each year, which, as you know, that can be a big fluctuation from year to year. The city's pension assessment automatically goes up 5% each year. We're utilizing the full levy limit under Prop 2.5. We're assuming that the school appropriation at least tracks the annual revenue growth for the city. So I guess one footnote I would add to this, with the changes with the Student Opportunity Act being passed in 2019, combined with the impacts from question 2, naturally what we're looking at here could very well be impacted once the state legislature and the governor work to put their budget together in terms of any potential changes that we might see resulting from that. And then health insurance, again, it's 13% of our budget. We're conservatively forecasting 4% each year, but that can get blown out of the water. We've been fortunate to have a couple good years where we've received some premium holidays due to COVID, but it's starting to go in the other direction again. And really, the long-term sustainability, which I always say it's sustainable on further modifications to the overall plan. And one example I always give is adjusting the employer contribution for the PPO plan to make it equivalent to the HMO plan. That alone would free up approximately $500,000 in budget capacity for the city. And here's the actual revenue forecast. I would just kind of highlight, so the FY23 estimate is here in blue. We'll be discussing with the City Council, collecting a total tax levy of $66 million, which is offset by free cash and other available revenue, totaling $610,000. Below that are all the local receipts, followed by our total net state aid, other funding from sources like the paid parking fund, et cetera, and then a reserve for any abatements and exemptions that are offered, brings you to the total general fund revenue. And of course, on the flip side, these are the expenditures broken down by the various cost centers, employee benefits, capital. You can kind of see how it shakes out at the end there. So that's pretty much the city's financial condition in a nutshell. I think I'll turn it over to Superintendent Gallagher and Phil to kind of drill down on what's going on in the schools.
You can keep going if you want.
I'm good.
Awesome job. I got my notes. All right. Well, thank you very much. Great job, Ethan, and setting the stage. So we have like two parts. We're going to kind of talk about what drives our budget process, going back to our strategic plan, and then Mr. Littlehale will go over some of the financing. So as part of I just want to go back to our strategic planning and once again credit our administrator, central office, school committee, because we did our strategic planning in the middle of a pandemic. So with those challenges, we had approximately 20 different focus groups, over 750 people participated in our strategic planning. And that was teachers, students, community members, parents. So we really feel we got a great snapshot of the next 5 years, what it's going to look like in Newburyport from a lot of the key stakeholders in the school system. So part of our strategic planning, and one thing I think we learned from the pandemic, the silver lining for schools especially, is have the ability to be flexible, to reevaluate on a daily basis. And that's what we utilized Amy Webb's Future Focus planning model to guide us. And as you'll see, and I'm going to talk about this, the community developed the vision for the district. So when we look at Portrait of a Graduate, the really key ideas of that of what are the skill sets that students need today to be successful in college and or the workforce. And we drilled down to that, working with all of those different focus groups. The second aspect is the strategies. So what are the strategies going to be utilized to achieve that vision? And in the presentation, you'll see where we have 5 strategies that kind of have the overview of the vision. And then really just drill it down to the tactics. And the tactics are the daily basis of what we're doing in the classroom and those short-term goals to a 1 to a 2 year, with the ability to reassess on the ground level. So the 5 key areas that really came out of our strategic planning process was this, is having one vision, portrait of a graduate. So the community of Newburyport said there's 5 areas that you really need to focus on, or our students need to be successful either in the workforce or college and career. So first piece is physically, socially, and emotionally well. And there's an old saying within education, Maslow before Bloom's. And that was really highlighted throughout our work. Being literate across all disciplines, being creative, innovative, collaborative problem solvers. Really, a lot of the initiatives we've been doing over the years, but having our students civically engaged, student voice is key. And then at the end here is being prepared for life after graduation. So the 5 strategies, the old strategic plan had 7. So our 5 strategies is really reimagining all of these different areas. So reimagining teaching and learning, reimagining support so all students are able and ready to learn, a culture of self-discovery and personal achievement, organizational design and operations, and then being an active community member of stakeholders. So these were the 5 areas that we're really focused on in the next 5 years, which led to our district goals for this year. So we've tied in our strategic initiatives and strategic planning to really the DESE model of kind of different areas that you really need to focus on. So for us, a professional practice goal is to increase the instructional leadership of our administrators within the district to support teachers in meeting the needs of all learners. Student learning goal is to increase support, improve student achievement for all students, at the same time closing those existing achievement gaps for the students who have high needs, our high needs population. School improvement goal is really to focus throughout the district, professional learning communities, and really looking at teacher-friendly data cycles, really analyzing data, student achievement, to really drive our instruction. And then the last piece, district improvement, which we've been working on for the past couple of years, is tying in our curriculum that aligns to not only the Massachusetts frameworks, but is really comprehensive and rigorous for our students to meet those needs and to meet the vision. We've done a nice job on our website. So if you log on and look at our website, so on this strategic matrix, so you have those goals that I just mentioned on the left side, you have your strategies, and as I was saying, the district tactics and what we're working towards, years 1 and 2, are these different initiatives. So on the website, you could click on those and see the outcomes, measurable outcomes for all of these different initiatives. So throughout the process, our budget process, and I'm going to go over the calendar and the multiple discussions that we're going to have, you're going to see a lot of that is going to tie directly back to this matrix, and then also our school improvement plans. So one of our goals as a district, from the district goals to the principal goals to the teacher goals, that the whole district is moving in the same direction, and then we all go back to the vision that the community has set for us. So everything is aligned as we're moving forward. So as we're talking about, as I said, the different budget items that we'll be presenting, you'll be able to refer back to the strategic plan and refer back to our district goals for us to accomplish. And then really similar to our budget process, just some timelines and the multiple discussions that we'll have over the next 4 or 5 months. But it really stems for our school councils and at the building level. And the school council will look at their school improvement plans and then also looking at the budget process. So as the principals are going to be presenting the individual budget needs and budget process, it starts with the discussion at the city council, at the school councils first. And then from there, we have our individual budget meetings with all of our stakeholders. We've already provided them budget guidelines based on the strategic plan. So each budget holder has guidelines that ties right back to the strategic plan and ties back to their school improvement plans. And so November and December, we'll be working with all of our budget holders. And what we've done as an administrative team is this is where we have a dialogue among all of the budget holders in developing, a priority list. We know that all of the asks can't be granted. And as the mayor and Ethan said, we're still going to be waiting on the allocations that will be coming from the state and the federal government and how these new, the questions, how that $1 million revenue is going to impact schools. So we're all kind of waiting to see how that's going to impact, but we always start preparing ahead of time. So then in January, I usually provide a preliminary budget for the school committee, which has all of the different asks that are in there. And then February, this is when we have all of our budget holders come in with their school councils, and then they do each individual presentation. And then we continue from February throughout March and into April, deliberations and working with school committee as we fine tune the budget depending on the allocations that we anticipate. And then the school committee votes on the final budget in April, and then we end up passing it on to the city council. So that's really the overall budget process for us. But as I said, I think by making yourself familiar with our strategic plan, as you're hearing items that are being presented in the budget, you'll see how it relates right back to the strategic planning from the community. So we're going to pass the torch on to Mr. Littlehale. And as the mayor said, we feel the majority of our budget is going to staff and salaries, and that's our most important asset of the school community. So here we go. Mr. Littlehale.
Just page up and page down?
Yeah, just that little arrow.
Okay.
Do you want the little green
No.
pointer? All right. You sure? All right.
Well, you can put it in the ground, I can run after it like a kitten.
All
Well,
right.
well, thank you, Sean. I guess I'm the other thorn, Ethan and I are the two thorns, and the rose was in the middle between us. So I'm gonna spend a few minutes just going over some of the numbers for the schools. This presentation is very similar to what it was last year, and as the superintendent said, about 75% of our budget is invested in staff salaries, and the rest is spread across all your other expenses. Hasn't really changed over the last number of years. This shows some of our revenue sources. Not that I like to criticize others, but Ethan, I can't read without a magnifying glass. So we've actually spread ours across 2 pages. Just to put a couple things, you take a look at it. You can look at the prior year, but I want to look at fiscal year 22 actual received. One of the things that we had been talking about back in the spring had to do with school choice and the balance that was in there, what the plan was for that. And so as we had said, we had budgeted about 1.2 million in fiscal year 22 to use out of school choice. We actually ended up using about 1.16, which is the combination of both the revenue, excuse me, the revenue number of 478, as well as the choice utilized, which really was coming out of the balance that we had available to us of about 687. I've got a couple of slides further on school choice that hopefully will make it a little clearer for everyone. Just going down, there's nothing else really going on in terms of revenue sources except for You'll see there's another line in there, it has 165,000. The Andy Wolf's doing a great job in terms of selling the high school, and that is the tuition revenue that we're receiving from foreign exchange students. So this is page 2. This is some of our smaller revenue sources, our other smaller entitlement grants. Going down with a couple things I want to point out. I'll get into ESSER a little bit more in the next slide, but we have non-reoccurring grants. So last year, Lisa Marie Ippolito, our assistant superintendent, did a great job of going out and getting some grants, but these are one-time grants. For example, we have about $130,000 from our Math Acceleration Academy grant that came through. So again, when we put the budget together, I never forecast those one-time grants because they were one-time grants. And unlike others, we talk about, what's the impact going to be of question 1. Well, we may all hope for things. I hope that we're going to get nothing, because that's where I start my budget from. Go conservatively, and then if we get anything above that, that will be a nice surprise. Just a different philosophy from where I come from. So all in all, you can see that we do have the health grant, which is $75,000. I believe this year is the last year of a 3-year cycle on that, so I'm not sure if we go out again, if it's available. Hopefully it will be. And then, of course, we had our earlier COVID grants that we got in fiscal year 20 or 21, and since these will be rolling off eventually off. And then for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, you'll see that we spent very little of ESSER 3 in fiscal year 22, and gives me a good segue. So this is the plan for ESSER 3 in terms of what we're going to be utilizing it for over the next 2 fiscal years. Both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 have they're not strange ending times because it lines up with the federal fiscal year end date. So ESSER 2 funds have to be completely utilized by September 30th of 2023. And then for ESSER 3, they have to be completely utilized by September 30th of 2024, or for us, which is the end of the first quarter of fiscal year 25. So again, this is a plan we have in place right now, but I want to point out in terms of the ESSER money, this is always subject to change. When we put the original application in last year, this is what we thought we were going to be needed for, what we're going to use it on. Not expectations, excuse me. I'm losing. Anyway, the plan can change because needs are going to change. That was the word I was searching for. So again, this is where we are right now. But as those needs change and we have to change how we're going to utilize the funds, we will go through the process with DESE in terms of putting through the amendments to the grants. But again, we do have the plan in place that by the time we hit September 30th of 2024, all of ESSER 2 and all of ESSER 3 will be completely utilized. ESSER 2 will be completely utilized this fiscal year, and again, ESSER 3 by the end of the first quarter of fiscal year 25. And part of the philosophy is we want to use this money in terms of investments in some one-time things that we might not have had the ability to do, or things that we need right now because of COVID needs. We try not to invest in positions. If any of you were around when the ARA funds ran out back in fiscal year 10 and 11, it's what's known as the cliff. A lot of districts back then invested a lot of their ARA funds into staff positions, and then all of a sudden when the ARA funds were gone, they said, oh, we've got all these positions, where's the funding coming from? So in terms of grants, a philosophy is you try not to have too many positions that are funded by grants that are going to end at some point in time. This is enrollment. Enrollment's been holding fairly steady as of the October 1st number. This year we're at about 2214, and as the superintendent said last year, over the last, how many years I get up there now? I don't know, 16, 17 years, it hasn't fluctuated by more than 100 students over that course, over that time period. So again, we're holding pretty steady on enrollment. Okay. As I have said in some of my other presentations, I like pictures. And so this is my picture of school choice. The revenue expenses and the fund ending balance starting back with fiscal year 1. So the revenue is the first column, and that's what we're getting for students who have chosen to come to Newburyport. And in the next slide, you're going to see how popular Newburyport has been in terms of school choice. The second bar is then how much we have spent of our school choice funds that have come in, how much we've spent in that fiscal year. And then finally, the green line shows you the fund ending balance at the end of each fiscal year. So you'll see that from about 2001 to about 2008, the ending balance was around 2, 3, 400,000 in that neighborhood. And then it started to rise up in 9 and 10. 9, not a whole lot was utilized. That was before my time, so I don't know the answer as to why that wasn't utilized much. So it got up as high as about $1 million, started to come back down in 14, 15, and then started to climb back up to where it reached a point in fiscal year 21. At the end of fiscal year 21, the balance was $1.5 million. Now, we also need to keep in mind that in 20 and 21, we had the COVID impact as well, especially in fiscal year 20. There were some expenses on the school side that got paid for by money that the city had received, so that reduced our need to dig into some of those balances to pay off or to meet our expenses. So as we had this conversation and we looked at, $1.5 million is an awfully high number, so we have put a plan together as to how we're going to work that number down, with the hope that by the time we hit the end of fiscal year 23, the ending balance in that fund would be between 300 and 500,000, which is where we'd like it to be for every year going forward, somewhere in that neighborhood, 300 to 500,000 as an ending balance. So again, for fiscal year 22, we had revenue of about 468,000, which was above what we had budgeted because we had more students decide to come to Newburyport than we had budgeted for. And we utilized, as I said earlier, just a shade under 1.2 million in terms of salaries. So right now, our end of our, September, June 30th, 2022 ending balance in the account was just under $890,000. So 600,000 less than it was the prior year. And again, for fiscal year 23, we've anticipated revenue to be about 300,000. Well, the budget anticipated revenue to be about 300,000. And we're planning to use 795,000 in terms of the school choice fund. So we are planning or have budgeted for that balance to be at the end of fiscal year 23 around 400,000. So again, trying to work that balance down to where the balance between how much is too much and how much is too little in terms of planning ahead. So that is, what I call the picture of school choice over the last 22 years. And just to give you some idea of the history of school choice, this actually comes from DESE, produces a couple of charts every year. And you'll see that since, I can't remember, was that 1996? Far more students have chosen, or their parents or guardians have chosen to send their students to Newburyport than have not, than Newburyport has sent out. Again, if you look, you look at the day around 20 and 21, again, we're having the impact of COVID. But as you can see, over 21, 22, and for 23, the number is starting to pick up again. Last year, we had about 68 students who came into the district, and we had 24.3, I think it was, who went out of the district. And this year, right now, we had budgeted to have about 60 students come in. We're actually at 80, which is good. And we have about 23 students at this moment who have decided to go elsewhere. And if you look at where those students are going right now, a lot of them are going to Newbury through the elementary school because they have a K-6 model, which some parents apparently like, as opposed to how we are breaking it up here in Newburyport. But then those students will come back after 6th grade. So again, parents have liked, or guardians have liked, sending their students to Newburyport, which me, coming here in my 2nd year, tells me that we've got a good school system. People like what we're offering and what we're doing. And again, it continues to grow as we go forward. So just again, wanted to give you some sense of school choice and what's been going on in terms of that. Excuse me. This is special education. Don't try to compare this one to last year's presentation because I've changed the numbers a little bit to clean it up a bit. Again, trying to show you in terms of what's been going on with special education. We got the bar graphs. The first one's tuition. The last 3 years, tuition has been holding fairly steady at around 3.3, 3.4 million. But I'm going to take a slight detour and talk about tuition just for a moment, going back to one of Ethan's concerns about inflation. So one of the things that happens within special education is the out-of-district schools have to go and have their tuition rates be approved by the Operational Services Division at the state level. So the law states that's what they have to do, and the law also states that by October 1st of each year, they have to issue a memo that goes to both the governor as well as the superintendents saying, here's our estimate of inflation for the next fiscal year. Over the last 10 years or so, that's been between 2 and 3%. And for fiscal year 23, when they sent the memo out last year, October 1st, they had an inflation expectation of 2.53%. Well, they sent it out for October 1st this year, and the number, not surprisingly, was a little higher than 2.53. It came in at 14%. So we all look at that number, we go, If we look at what we're spending right now for our district tuition, that would mean, all things staying the same, it would cost us almost an additional $480,000 to send our students to the programs that they're being sent to. So something to keep in mind as we go through the budget process. Now, the law also states that by February 1st, OSD has to approve the tuition rates for these private school programs for the upcoming fiscal year. So we should know by February what the actual rates are going to look like. I don't expect it to be 14%, but it's certainly going to be higher than it has been in the past in terms of the increase. And if it turns out to be 14%, you can say I was wrong. And that's for Brian's benefit. So going along, again, just showing one of the other challenges that we're having in special ed, and it's true across all districts, is transportation. The rates are going up. The number of providers is going down. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Salter was bought out by a company, North Reading was bought out by a company. They're both bought out by the same company, which is a holding company down in Connecticut, who is in the process of buying up all of these local bus firms to, I don't know, turn themselves into another first student, I'm not really sure, but it's really cut down on the competition. And so if there's no competition, as we all know, rates are going to go up. It's hard to find drivers. So it's getting very expensive in terms of special ed transportation. And again, all of us in all the districts are saying the same thing. Can't find drivers. You can't find a provider who can, provide the service because it's just not available. So that's another budget impact there. Non-personnel, I'm not going to worry about that. And again, for personnel, I did want to point out one thing. Excuse me. The non-personnel looks like in fiscal year 23, it's going up quite a bit over fiscal year 22. That's true and it's not true. We had what as I like to call a geography issue within our numbers, in that our SAC, what are they? Adjustment counselors, I'm sorry. The adjustment counselors historically have been budgeted in the guidance area. So guidance did not fall under special ed. So for fiscal year 23, we changed that out, and so that the adjustment counselors are now rolling up under special ed. So in fiscal year 23, you'll see that, you can't see it, but I'm sorry, they are included now in the fiscal year 23 salary numbers, which is why you see down at the bottom, we put that thing where it's about a $930,000 change that I did not go back and restate the prior years to make it a fair comparison, but just so you know that the $1.4 million increase in salaries, $900,000 is strictly due to a presentation change. So again, we talk about special education, have invested quite a bit over the last number of years trying to bring students back or prevent students from going out, starting up new programs, and we continue to do that, and so that's special education. And then finally, this is just to give you a sense of what some of the tuitions are that we are currently paying for some of our current students. They go from under $50,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Again, that's driven by the needs of the student and finding the correct program for the student to be sent to. So, like anything else, they're going to go up, in terms of the rates. Oops, I'm going to back up for just 1 second. I just want to make one more comment in terms of inflation. Even if we weren't in a high inflation environment right now, one of the things I'd mentioned several times in the past is that regardless of that, COVID has changed the cost of how we operate. Our operating expenses go up. One example is we have to run our HVAC equipment longer than we did in the past. And that we now have to bring in 100% outside air and mix it, where in the past we may have reused some of the air that was already in. So, and then we have more expensive cleaning materials and things like that. So just to keep in mind that our cost structure itself has also increased just from COVID. So with that, I think you got the last one, or does Ethan have the last one? Well, who's got this one?
I can go that way. You can do that, Phil.
All right. All right, so the next steps. As Sean said, we get the budget process, going to be reviewed with leadership. We're going to have all our meetings. the principals and the department heads will put together their budgets, put together their needs or their asks, or if they have new programs on the institute and things like that. Again, this is all driven by the strategic plan. It has to tie into the strategic plan. And then, we go through it, the school committee will adopt the school budget, they'll approve whatever we ask them for. I'm sure that will happen. They're at least 10 days prior to the mayor's submission to the city council, and we all know the timing here. The mayor proposes his budget, sends to the city council by 15th, and as the law says, the council has 45 days to approve the budget and the capital improvement plan by July 1st, and we start all over again on July 1st of the next fiscal year. It's just never ends. And with that, now I'm going to sit down. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for that. Ethan, Phil, and Sean. We'll get into the Q&A now. So Ethan has his computer here, so if you want him to pull back up a slide to dive a little deeper, we can do that. But the floor is open for questions. Bruce?
Phil, I just wanted to make a point of clarification. When you put up the out-of-district tuitions under special education,
Yeah.
that is an annual figure. Those
That's an
figures
annual
are
fee
annual.
per student.
Okay.
Yes. And that is just the,
That doesn't include
it
transportation.
does include transportation, it does include any additional service that might be needed. We have some students that require a one-on-one aid or para. That is just what I call the base cost of the program.
And those are the programs that we're utilizing. And some of those programs, we have, multiple students that we're supporting.
Just a reminder to talk into the microphones, okay, when we're asking or answering questions. Go ahead, Member Cole.
This is for Phil. Phil, I just want to, clarify. You mentioned, used the word utilized for ESSER 3 funds by September 23rd.
By September 30th, 2024, ESSER
Okay.
3 has to be utilized.
Okay,
Now,
so,
they don't have to be spent,
all right,
but you have to have them committed.
so essentially it's an obligation then?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
good way to put it.
Okay, thank you.
Can you two just speak real quick, just I don't know if everyone else knows this in the room, about utilizing the ESSER 3 for, let's say, full-day kindergarten, and why we did that this year, and how that should help us in previous years once ESSER runs out?
Yes, so part of the, having full-day kindergarten, and utilizing that, we tied that back into learning loss and support for the students. But now that we've, have full-day, we're offering full-day kindergarten, that gets enrolled in our enrollment numbers. So before those, we'll say 150 to 200 students weren't part of the enrollment numbers because parents were paying for that. So now that their kindergarten is now fully free, part of the school, so that will roll into our enrollment numbers, which then will come out of
Increase our
the Chapter 70 funds. So that 300 is not a recurring,
Right.
part of our budget. Now, hopefully that explains it.
Councilor McCauley?
Yeah, since we're on that subject, so in SS3, you made a point about not paying one-time fees or paying salaries with these one-time fees, right? Yet kindergarten is paid with ESSER 3 funds, right? And that explains it. But the interventionist and the IAs, so there's roughly about $750,000 of salary fees being paid out of that. What's the plan to replace those when you roll off? I think you addressed the kindergarten piece, they'll get additional Chapter 70, but the interventionist and the IAs are being paid out of this, so what's the plan for that?
All right, so, as we had said, 300,000 of that is just for year one in terms of kindergarten, so that rolls away. As for the other positions, and I don't want to speak for, out of turn, but a lot of those are COVID-driven needs right now, and as COVID hopefully gets behind us, we will again look at what our needs are in terms of staffing, and then reallocate funds as needed. So, we're always looking at our staffing models to figure out what we need or don't need, and hopefully, part of the strategy has been, Counselor, is that when we hit the cliff, it's not a big drop. In other words, we don't have too many positions sitting out there. So, again, we're going to try to, over the next 2 years, roll those positions out of the grants and either determine perhaps we don't need them or we need them some other way, or we are gonna need to continue them and have to figure out how to find other offsets within the budget to pay for them.
Yeah, and the other piece under ESSER 3, it's almost like you're predicting the future. Like when that grant came out, so we were anticipating more interventionists, more IAs. So that money we're allocating for that. But as Phil said, part of the grant process, especially for ESSER 3, is you can reallocate that funding. So right now, if we anticipated we need 5 interventionists because of, severe learning loss, or we need, 7 IAs, utilizing ESSER 3 funding, which we haven't spent that. So then we can say, wait a second, we're gonna change, reallocate that ESSER money for different pieces. So right now, I think what we're seeing, as we're developing our budget, is really, I think, upgrading our technology, which would fit into the ESSER funding.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's-
I understand that, thank you. I was just wondering, you termed it the cliff, right? Is that when it ends and you have salaries paid out of that, what's the longer-term plan, right? Immediate plan is cut, but you've got some runway here to plan for that, and that was the answer. If I may, I have another question.
Sure.
Thank you for the presentation on choice, but there's a discrepancy here, and I hope you can address it. You had mentioned that on June 30th, you have a balance of $800,000 in the choice funds, yet in the city's financial books, we have, in the choice revolving funds, we have a balance of $2.2 million. And so there's a discrepancy there that, from our official numbers, and that would cascade down. So when you, for example, like in '23, you said in '23 you were going to use $790,000 of choice funds, and you have, but there was an additional $475,000 that you took like 30 days after you got your funding. So I'm curious as to what the additional $475,000 is. And as I had a conversation with the finance director, as of today, your budget, your revolving fund total is over $1.1 million. So there's a discrepancy there in the numbers, and I don't know if you have a separate choice account and the city has the revolving account or whatnot, but the numbers there are significant. And I was wondering if you could either comment or follow up with that at a later time.
Ethan had sent me contacted me earlier today about that. The biggest thing that's causing the difference is right now, the tuition that we've received from the foreign students is being booked to the choice revolving account, which it should not be. So that's $165,000 in there that does not belong in there. So we need to move that out and set up a separate revolving account for the, for the tuition from the foreign students. And there were some late adjustments in terms of how much we were charging off to school choice. As you know, the schools close its books a lot later because we have to carry the teachers over the summer. And so I'm still in September trying to figure out what that final number was. And so there was a little more charge off to school choice than we actually had, back at the end of June. So that accounts for pretty much the discrepancy.
Okay, can you take a note to follow up, the two of you, with me on that? Because based upon even a generous smoothing out of that, it's, $600,000 or $700,000 gap between the two totals here. And I'm sure, I'm sure it's explainable. I just don't know what it is today, right? Okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So as of June 30th, 2022, on a cash basis, there was a balance of $2.2 million, which we report. And the major difference there is $1.1 million in summer payroll for the schools, predominantly for the month of August, where the school academic contract is still ongoing, but the city's ledger has cut off. So
Yeah, I know that, but, we go through this every year. And the simple answer is, we already budgeted for that, right? We already have it in. It's held over, right? This is a specific line item, right? And so, if we want to get into it now, great, but I'd rather we follow up with it so that we can get the numbers aligned that are appropriate.
Okay. I'd be happy to sit down with Ethan, and he and I will put together and meet with you and go over it.
Great, thank you very much. I just have one other question, and this is for Superintendent Gallagher. In your strategic plan that you laid out and spent some time with, how do the tactics, as you call them, get measured? And then how do those measurements manifest themselves in the impact to the budget?
Yeah, so as part of listening to the feedback, I think from the community, you know, part of the old strategic plan is how do you measure, you know, we heard this, how do you measure what, you know, what assessments are you utilizing for the measurement? So when you go online, so for each one of those items, when you click on it, you have the measurable outcomes. So for those 15 different tactics, where it's all right there, like how we're gonna measure it, how we're monitoring it, and then the other piece that working with our school committee is providing them updates on where we're at with the strategic plan. Because I think the one thing we don't do a good job in really showing all the great stuff that we're doing. So this would be a great opportunity for us to utilize our strategic plan to provide those updates. But it's a little bit more detail online when you click on each one of those, especially for the community too. If they look at, you know, one of those tactics or strategies that we're doing, you could click on it and see a whole printout on how we're planning on measuring that.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that, it was the budget impact as well, right? So I know you're communicating to the school committee, but is there a top-down plan, let's say, if some measurements aren't making it to the degree that are targeted, to shift some of the funding around? Is that the plan for that?
Yeah,
The school committee would drive that? Could you help me
And I
understand
think-
that?
Exactly. So I think I think what we've done a nice job of doing, let's just go over staffing patterns, for example. So as part of our strategies, as part of the tactics, we look at programming, right? Let's say we've added special education programming, and we have staff within, let's say, a certain program. But when we're looking at the assessments, we're looking at student achievement, we'll work together and say, how can we may have to shift and reallocate some resources within the operational budget. So a lot of times, our asks or the staffing that we present is just offset already in the operational budget. So that would be one area that we would be looking at, is the programming itself, and if the students aren't achieving the way we expect it, then we reallocate that program or we change the program to meet the needs. That would be just one example of that, but that really informs our decision. And if you go back to the district goals, you know, part of that is district-wide emphasis on professional learning communities, where we're looking at the student data. So even if it's a program that we're utilizing for assessment data, for example, and it's not meeting the needs of the students, then we'll switch that type of stuff. So I think it's ongoing, but I think the other piece that we've learned over the last couple of years is to give those updates to the school committee, but also to the community at large. Like, this is what we're looking at, and this is why, and this is what's really driving our budget needs and budget asks. So,
Okay, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
And just to piggyback on that, Superintendent Gallagher, correct me if I'm wrong too, but, you know, I think this year in particular, you know, now that, you know, we have MCAS data from last year, and now we're using a new tool, iReady, that's gonna give us some more assessments throughout the year. I think we could probably use that mid-year and the MCAS and really see right away a quick snapshot if there are certain areas that we should really think budgetarily on before you really get deep into the process, in February and March.
Exactly, and I think our Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Ippolito's done a great job coming into our second year, but really that first year, really assessing a lot of our internal assessment data, and then also our program data. So we have made some shifts programmatically regarding some of the tools that we're using for students. So it makes it, I guess that internal assessment data is vital, because it's the actual data instead of like MCAS data that comes out once a year
Right.
in October. So the ongoing internal assessment is what really drives, what we're doing.
We're going to have a public data meeting as well, too, so
Correct.
that's coming up as well. Member Walker, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. So I first want to say thank you to all the staff who presented tonight. I appreciate that this is an iterative process and that we're just starting it. So I think it's really important for us to frame the discussion around the budget based on strategic plans, overall city challenges that we're facing, and our overall city needs. And I think that's really important for all of us to keep in mind, that we're starting the process tonight. I think some of the questions are really important, but I think we have to all remind ourselves this is an iterative process, step by step. The school committee's just getting started on our budget review. You guys are just getting started on the citywide review. I have a question related to that about framing. We mentioned COVID challenges in the schools. We're continuing to have operating expenses that I don't think are gonna go away. I think that's gonna be a long-term thing, that we're gonna just adjust our operating expenses to deal with. What are some of the things that the city anticipates maybe being, are you gonna have, I'm assuming you have similar things you have to adapt to the COVID way of doing things, but are there other things that it would be helpful for us to be aware of framing the budget going forward? Are there gonna be, anticipated expenses or pressures on other revenue sources or things like that maybe would be helpful for us to understand as we're framing the budget discussion at the school committee, school budget level?
Yeah, sure. So there's definitely other revenue sources out there that are kind of, sitting on the horizon. One example I'd give is short-term rentals has been a big one. Permits charged by the licensing board, another $200,000 right there. If they start those back up, there's definitely, I think, some tools available to help offset some of these pressures that we're seeing. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're kind of, stuck to Prop 2.5%. We're lucky to have pretty strong new growth year after year, which has kind of pushed us into the 3 to 3.5% each year. But yeah, with the COVID and inflation, it's going to be hard.
I think too, just because we're so heavily reliant, 85% or so on our property taxes. So that I don't think that moves the needle a lot, but I do think there's a lot of little things that hopefully will help, in us raising revenues moving forward. Council Z?
I just had a couple of questions. One is maybe more observation/question, but for both Ethan and Phil. And one concern I have from a high level looking at the numbers is an underestimation of the impact of inflation. So I agree with you. I don't think it's going to run 14 come whatever, February, but let's say it's going to run 7 to 9, somewhere in there. Every year we have this conversation. We usually talk about level services, level funded. And we say we're not level funding, we're going for level services. But it seems like to me, with inflation, we're very likely to have a situation where we're paying more but having less services because we simply can't keep up with the inflation. So my question, I guess, is we've already seen a little bit of it with energy in this budget, with gas or oil or fuel costs. But, I mean, what are you seeing or hearing in your circles for finance in terms of what's the answer to that? Is that just going to be, yeah, we're going to pay 2 to 5% more and get 1 to 3% less and then just balance it out? I don't know if you have any thoughts, either of you, from kind of what the scuttle is out there in the space.
Well, I guess there's a couple of things. I know our head of buildings and grounds has been telling me that, costs are up in terms of supplies, which is not surprising. And so in anticipation of that, we did we did put more money into those lines within the operating budget this year for buildings and grounds. Was it enough? Probably not. But from a professional standpoint, I don't think inflation is going to stay where it is. It will come back down. It will be above where it has been for the last 10, 20, 30 years. And again, if you look at our budget from the school side, 75% of salaries, and the good news is that all of our unions are under contract for 2 more years, so those are settled, so we have surety in terms of what those will cost us. In terms of energy, and Ethan can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we have contracts for supply of a lot of our gas and electricity at this point. So those are locked in terms of what the rates are. Of course, once those contracts expire, it's further down the road. And in many cases, it's a matter of timing when you go out and get a contract for energy, because it's a zero-sum game. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. So right now, if you locked in a contract 2 years ago at a great rate for electricity, the ones on the other side who took a hedge on it are the losers. You know, I like to try to at least lock things in for as long as we can, so we have some surety of what our expenses are going to be. You know, you can't do it for everything, but again, if you look at the overall school budget, because outside of special ed tuition, we're talking, cost of paper, supplies, and things like that, we can manage within that, in terms of, we work off of state contracts, and a lot of those have already been negotiated, so we get the benefit of the state with their buying power, keep down the prices. We get great prices on our supplies from both Staples and W.B. Mason. So yes, we're going to have to be cognizant that those expenses are going to go up, and it's just fact of life. But we're aware of it now. We're going to continue to plan for it.
All right, so next question is just about, back to the ESSER slide that you had there. I guess my concern is there's a lot of focus on the salaries, understandably so, because we see those as generally as recurring, although maybe a recalibration of needs causes. But I guess I'm struggling to see what parts of this list would not be needed in the future. In other words, how much of this are actually permanent structural changes to what the schools will need? I know we're focused on, okay, the kindergarten, don't worry, that will go away. But are you really saying, IT needs, the instructional technology is 190, we won't need that anymore, professional? I'm just concerned the cliff is a cliff, and it's quite large, and yeah, we might have some of the things softened up, and maybe that's a broader ongoing conversation. But it seems like if really the world has changed, then some of these things just become permanent, and we would be expected to replace them. And if we had to even replace half of this list, it would still be, to find $500,000 for the schools, to cut to the chase on the numbers, that's hard. We know that. Everybody who's been on for a while would say, yeah, coming up with $500,000, either inside the schools or from the city or some combination of both, is still a painful and challenging exercise. So maybe put a pin in the conversation of, so what do you really see is in this list, for example, and say, yeah, we really think we don't have to do this, but we really think in the end we're going to have to make up 500,000, 400,000, 600,000, and maybe think about it. The last question I want to ask, because I had others, but I'll just yield. But the last one I want to ask is just, one question that I have in my head, and nobody beat me up too much, but if COVID started tomorrow, if we finished COVID 1 and then we had COVID 2 tomorrow, are we in a position, have we spent the money in a way that the kids could stay in school? So in other words, have we thought about what the next, you mentioned the air changes, for example, that's a fairly straightforward example, but to me, it just makes me question, okay, some of the sugar money in theory was to bolster or create an environment where you wouldn't have the impacts you had last time. And I think about that often. What would it look like if COVID started January 1st, 2023? Would we be able to keep the kids in school? Have we made the investments with this special, money from above that just fell out of the sky and will eventually dry out? So I don't know if there's thoughts about that but I know these are all broad questions on purpose.
No, right, and I just think in general, I think there's a lot of lessons learned throughout the COVID process. If you recall, even last year, we think it's many years. Last year, we were in the middle of COVID. There was if you recall, the athletic games, parents couldn't go, and I think for us, when we went through the whole process, I think we start with understanding that kids need to be in school. I think we've upgraded our air quality, working with Steve. So I think we're in a good place. If they said, hey, COVID's coming back, we got to do X, I think our district's in a much better place than maybe some other districts, because I think we took the philosophy, even through the most trying times, to have our kids in-person learning as much as we could. I think when we're looking at the different aspects, I think for us, when we have, and remember, we haven't, these are the buckets that we put in for ESSER 3. We weren't a year and a half ago, we didn't know what the learning loss, right, would be, and the additional supports that we would need. But I would say if we're looking at being ready, it's really upgrading our technology, for the students, for the staff, infrastructure. We did that throughout the pandemic, but I think that would be an opportunity. I think the one piece that we learned is having the ability to still connect with people through technology, with our students and families. I think that would be, one area. But superintendents, we meet on a regular basis, and I think there was a lot of lessons learned through COVID, and the understanding for us, when it's safe, is to make sure that our students are in-person learning, the benefits of that. So I think our district did a great job in managing through that. And it's something, I think we learned a lot of the positives and some of the negatives that happened throughout that. So I think we're in a good place. I know working with Steve Burkholm and Phil and the upgrades to the ventilation system was a key aspect of that. So I think we'll be, I guess you can't predict the future, but I think going through a pandemic as a, community, as a superintendent, I think we have some experience on how to deal. I mean, knock on wood, I don't want to deal with that again, but if we have to, we'll do it. So I'm not sure if that answers specifics, but I think having our kids in school and participating in programming is essential. I think that's one lesson we all learned.
Member Menon?
Yeah, if I could just to follow up with another example. When we were pushed into impact bargaining with the teachers union, we made a presentation to the teachers union of the ventilation system that we had improved on, and it actually exceeded, in terms of quality, it exceeded what the state teachers union was asking for, so much so that the union actually asked us for the presentation so they could take it into other districts. But that's an example of sort of trying to front load, trying to deal with some of this stuff earlier.
Councilor Vogel?
Thank you. To both sides, if I may. In taking a look, I think first maybe to Ethan, in taking a look at your revenue anticipations, so maybe on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being extremely conservative and 1 being a little bit less conservative, or certainly less conservative, your predictions are falling where on that scale? I mean, in terms of your revenue that you're anticipating, how conservative are you, or how?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put a number to it. We're always building a conservative estimate, which kind of is evidenced by the free cash balance that has been pretty stable over the past many years. So yeah, I don't think we're not changing our philosophy in that. We're continuing to conservatively estimate our local revenue.
Right.
I think not for the worst case scenario, but again not for the best case scenario.
And
Somewhere in between, finding that middle ground.
And as you say, the free cash is the indicator of that. And on the school side?
It's the same thing. I tend to budget conservatively. I have a motto in my head, which is I don't like making promises that I can't keep. And I want to make sure that the budget is sustainable. So, there's always that push and pull in terms of we've got funding, but I'm trying to look 3 years down the road, saying, but are we going to have it 3 years down the road? Start something up, then have to drop it because we didn't have it, in checking the priorities and doing all that. So again, we do it conservatively. We in terms of entitlement grants from the federal government, which would be Title I, Title II, special ed, those have been flatlined for X number of years now. And so every year we've just been flatlining that number. So again, we try to do it conservatively so that we have some flexibility during the course of the year. If something comes up, the thing that causes most business managers to lose sleep at night or have their hair fall out of their heads, besides 2 daughters, is finding out from your special ed director, we've got to go place a couple more students out of district, and it's not in the budget, for a few $100,000. You want to try to have some flexibility within our budgeting to make sure that we can handle up to a certain amount. So,
And then-
again, it's conservative.
Thank you. And then just one last sort of follow-up, if you will, about the inflation number. I mean, we hear inflation, 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 yet I wonder how you follow it, where you're getting your input. For example, CPI came in today at 0.2% or something, like half of what was predicted. I think most general idea now is that we've kind of hit our peak and it's coming down. I'm just wondering how you're following it and how you're making those adjustments, and again, to the, how you plug that in on both sides, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think Phil addressed it well earlier in talking about our collective bargaining agreements and labor contracts, which are, by far the largest part of the municipal budget, including the school district. Those are locked in, can predict those, almost to the penny to a degree. It's really, the other stuff. I think on the city side, one big one that we're looking at is solid waste in terms of hauling, which gets impacted by more expensive labor, but also more expensive fuel, and kind of what that looks like into a renewal. I think we're fortunate that we have budgeted a bit of a contingency there to help buffer that. But yeah, we know it's going to go up. It's just a matter of how much exactly. But yeah, we work with what we know. In terms of the longer term forecasting, we're just using, the available, data that I mentioned, the indices. But yeah, all we can do is, budget based on, what we know, and what we can, reasonably anticipate. And, that's why we have a strong, reserve balance to help, buffer, anything that's unexpected above and beyond that.
And also unexpected coming down below that as well.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's good. Thank you kindly.
Any other questions? Councilor Khan?
Thank you, both of you, everyone who presented. I guess my question, just to kind of, a couple of things. One is on, I know we talked about enrollment, and over time we've talked about enrollment. What does that look like? And I know it's hard to project, but that would be helpful to get an idea, especially as I think, I see everything as some type of an investment into what we're putting in to get the right output that we want. So at some point, if you guys get any data on that, I'd be really curious what that enrollment looks like. The second piece, I just want to, and I know you always do this, Superintendent, is as you are working on the budget, everyone's here, and we have the district goals matrix, which I really appreciate, and I really look forward to clicking into these cells and seeing more, is that that prioritization on, as the budgeting process is happening, what are the things that are absolutely necessary and good to have now? Because I can appreciate it might be hard to getting all of these things, given what might be, at the end of the day, what the city contribution side is. So I guess I encourage that to still be done, and to tie it to this would be fantastic to understand. So thank you. Just more statements.
Yeah, we made a point to talk about that the other night at school committee meeting, that, having those conversations about priorities and what, we want to have that full conversation, even though we know at the end of the day, we probably aren't going to be able to fit everything under there. But then tying it back to the strategic plan and portrait of a graduate, it kind of puts it all in perspective, and then we can really make some good decisions as far as that goes. Committee member Higgins.
Question for the superintendent. How many FTEs are you investing in the co-teaching model? I saw that in the district goals. Which students are being targeted to benefit from those co-teaching classrooms? And do you anticipate that that additional investment will reduce any of the out-of-district placements?
Yeah, it's, so we're co-teaching throughout the district, so we have small pockets at the high school, the Mullen, in the NOC. But we're really, part of our literacy plan is we're really targeting the Bresnahan. So most of our co-teaching modeling is happening at the Bresnahan, which ties to some of our special education programming. So we do anticipate, we've seen, the data showing, especially at the Bresnahan, we've seen some improvements, especially with our students with learning disabilities. You know, we've developed a couple programs down there. Ann Larson is also, works as a consultant for Landmark. So we're modeling our reading programs after the Landmark School. So that's been going on for 2 years, and as part of that, it's really that co-teaching model, you know, that we have. So as we continue with the budget process, that could be something I could show where that model is, and then how many teachers are participating in that.
I would imagine that we could also look at instructional assistants as far as that goes too, and see if that has a difference in how many we're needing, you know, per grade level, or what the needs are
Yeah,
there.
we're actually doing a IA audit right now. We're gonna be working with Mr. Pierce, our new special ed director, and a company coming in to kind of look at our staffing patterns within the IA structure.
Yep, oh, that's a great idea. Member Menon?
Yeah, just a clarification for the superintendent. The current kindergarten and preschool kids are not part of our census figure, our demographic figure of students, or they are?
Kindergarten is now, because it's free kindergarten that the district is offering. Preschool is not.
So it just seemed to me that suddenly we were going to get a big bump in students if we're now counting the kindergarten students.
Yeah, those students would be part of your per pupil expenditure. So we do anticipate, you know, with our October 1st data that we submitted, which now includes the kindergarten students, that our Chapter 70 funds should increase. So that's a one, it's, you know, we utilize some of the ESSER funding as a one-time payment for the tuition-free kindergarten for the families.
Yeah,
Member Walker?
Yeah, thank you. And if you can't answer this tonight, that's fine, but I was just curious about the capital improvement plan expenditures. I understand the target about the debt service, 2.5%. I think it's of the general fund revenues. Do you also have a target for non-debt service capital expenses? So like money that you don't have to bond, or projects you don't have to bond for, that kind of thing? Or is that not, if you can't answer that tonight, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything offhand, but that's how, when we
Okay.
identify any kind of projects, we look at where they fall
Yeah.
on the capital improvement plan, and then we
I
look at
didn't-
what funding sources. that
Right, I
we
guess
have
my
for
question
that.
was, you know, you have a target of 2.5% for the debt service. Do you also think about how much of your budget that's not debt service should be allocated to capital expenditures? Just a thought that might be helpful.
Sure, yeah. We do a little analysis in the capital improvement program. Yeah, we think of the 2.5 as actual debt
Yep.
service.
Right.
And then, yeah, there's a percentage above and beyond that we're looking at. Historically, it's been more driven by, you know, free cash spending.
Okay.
We're working to incorporate that more into the budget itself too. If you look at, you know, the biggest one is sidewalk funding,
Right.
for example.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I think we're good. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone.